we saw this most awesome ramp that has been built. That gives you a warm feeling. You know that the congregation has made preparation for you to be here, and they want you here, and they're trying to be as accommodating as possible, and that means a great deal. You put us up in a nice motel that accommodates the needs that I have now that I have been in this accident. You have come across as a very warm and friendly congregation from the time that we walked in the door, and that makes a very good impression. It's the kind of church that if you were a visitor, you would think, I want to come back and visit there again. So I commend you for that. I'm going to talk this morning about the accident that I was involved in a few months ago, and I want to forewarn you, this is still an emotional topic for me. I still struggle. I keep thinking at some point I'll be able to preach this lesson without struggling, but it hasn't happened yet. And so I'll forewarn you as I begin the lesson today. After I had this accident and I spent 3 months in the hospital, I guess after I'd been in the hospital about 2 months, they allowed me to start leaving on the weekends. And so I was in the hospital in Shepherd Center in Atlanta, Georgia, and so when I could leave on the weekends, a local congregation there in Atlanta asked me if I would like to come and preach to them. And I said that I would, but I was very nervous about it. It was the first time I had preached since the accident. It had been 2 months since I'd been in the pulpit. I was worried about my voice, how it was going to hold up. I was worried because I couldn't get behind a pulpit. You know, how am I going to get on the stage? I'm not able to stand. I'm in a wheelchair. All these things are going through my mind. I thought, I can't stand. How am I going to preach? And then right before I got up to preach, and it was actually kind of funny, but right before I got up to preach, the song leader got up and led the song, Stand Up for Jesus. And I leaned over to Sherry and I said, this song is very offensive to me. On May the 5th of this year, I started a gospel meeting in Salem, Virginia at the West Side Church of Christ, where Brother Eddie Gilpin preaches. This is a shot from their auditorium. On May the 6th, which was the next day, it was a Monday, Brother Eddie and his wife Jeannie invited us to their house for lunch. They told us that we were going to visit, and then we were going to be going to a little cafe, a little restaurant nearby. And so after we visited for a little while, we went outside, and they said, let's get on the four-wheelers to go to the restaurant. And I thought, what kind of restaurant are we going to that we're going to be getting on four-wheelers? So anyway, we rode across their farm to this very beautiful area under the trees. And when we got there, they had a table prepared, and they had set up a restaurant on their property. In fact, we took this picture under the trees on their farm, and we visited with them, and we just had a wonderful lunch that had been prepared. You could not have asked for a better day. After we finished eating, they said, would you like to take a tour of our property on the four-wheelers? And we said, yeah, that'd be great. And so Eddie and Jeannie got on one four-wheeler in front of us, and we followed them, Sherry and I on the other. I was driving, Sherry was on the back, and we started out across the property, and we traveled. We got up to a hill, and we stopped, and I took this picture with my iPhone just of the spread of their land. You can see that it is a very beautiful picture. We were getting ready to go down this path here that is cut with the lawnmower. In fact, this picture was taken just minutes, maybe, I guess minutes before the accident occurred. Brother Eddie took this picture of me and Sherry when we were at the top of the hill. We started riding down this hayfield that had normally been cut, and this is where I went blank because I don't know what happened. Apparently, I hit something. They say that the four-wheeler flipped about 4 times through the air. Sherry went one direction. I flew off in the other direction. And when I hit the ground, I had a great deal of damage. I broke my back. I severed my spinal cord. When Eddie realized something had happened, he turned around and he saw the four-wheeler had been flipped, and he came to me. I was unconscious. He thought I was dead. Sherry said that she hit the ground far enough away that she couldn't see us, but she could hear us. And she could hear Eddie calling my name, but she said that I wasn't responding. And so she was praying to God that I wasn't dead or that I wasn't brain damaged. After a bit, I came to, and I still don't remember any of this, but Eddie said, I kept saying, I can't feel my legs, I can't feel my legs. Sherry said, at a distance she could hear me groaning and my speech was slurred and I was hurting. And she said that I was saying, I can't breathe, please move me, please lift me. But of course Eddie wouldn't. He didn't know what would happen, what kind of damage he would cause me if he moved me. They called an ambulance. When the ambulance got there, they knew there was nothing they could do, so they called a helicopter. A helicopter came to the property and they medevaced me to the hospital in Roanoke, Virginia. When I got to the hospital, they determined that I had a broken back. This is actually an x-ray of my back. When I say it's broken, you can see it was quite literally broken. I had a broken sternum. I had a cracked C1 vertebrae. I also had a severed spinal cord. They operated on me in the hospital, and they fused together 5 vertebrae. When I woke up in the hospital, I was very confused. This is where my memory picks up. And I asked the doctor, where am I? And he said, you're in the hospital. And I said, why? And he said, you've been in an accident. After a minute, it occurred to me, and I remember saying, I can't feel my legs. And he said, you've had a severed spinal cord. And I asked him, will I ever walk again? And he said, I can't say for sure, but probably not. I thought it was a dream. You know, you ever have the dream, it's such a terrible dream, and you think, okay, I'm going to go back to sleep, I'll wake up, and this is going to be gone. And that's what I thought was going to happen. For 2 or 3 days, I kept thinking, this is a dream. And so finally, after 2 or 3 days, I woke up and I realized it wasn't a dream. And I was devastated. After I spent a few days in the hospital in Roanoke and they stabilized my back, they airlifted me to Shepherd Center in Atlanta, Georgia. And in fact, this is a picture they took shortly before they took me to Shepherd. They airlifted me to Shepherd Center in Atlanta, Georgia. I spent the next 2.5 months in rehab, and I just got out in August of this year. Now, what I want to do with my time this morning is I want to stop with the story right here, and I want to make some applications from this event because I think there's a lot of spiritual applications involved in this. I'm going to do 3 things. Number 1, I'm going to make some observations/applications. Number 2, I'm going to talk about some benefits of suffering, specifically my suffering. And then number 3, I'm going to ask, where do I go now? Where do we go now? All right, here's point number 1 in this lesson. I'm going to make some observations/applications from this event. Number 1, I want to talk about suffering. Brethren, when I hit the ground and I was lying there, my spinal cord was broken. I was in pain. I don't remember this, but they say I was begging for pain. I was begging for relief from pain. Later, I was in the hospital, and I do remember this. I was in pain that was so intense. I was begging the nurse, please help me. Please give me some relief. And she said, there's nothing I can do. I said, give me some morphine. Make it stop. She said, I can't. I remember breaking down crying. And I said, you got to get me some help. Finally, they got a doctor. They did some things, gave me some medicine, got me stabilized. When I got back into the room, I remember lying there at that point, and I got to thinking about this. I want you to consider a person who dies and goes to hell. A person who dies and goes to hell, the pain that they will be suffering will be 1,000,000 times worse than what I was suffering. And they too will be begging for relief, but they're not going to get any. They're going to be in darkness, they're going to be in fire, and it won't stop. Revelation 14 verse 11 says, and the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever, and they shall have no rest, day or night. The suffering I had was so bad, but it stopped. Imagine it never stopping. Ladies and gentlemen, when you experience that kind of pain, one thing I know is you don't want to ever go to a place where it's going to happen again, much less forever and ever and ever. Here's a second thing I want to make note of. From the scripture reading today, you don't know what's going to happen on tomorrow. James chapter 4 and verse 14 says, whereas you do not know what will happen on tomorrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. On this particular day, we were having a wonderful day, and suddenly, without warning, I nearly died. What if when I had hit the ground, instead of lying there in pain, what if I had lifted up my eyes in eternity? Friends, it will forever be impressed upon my mind how real of a reality that is, that at any moment, any one of us could be completely cut off, unexpectedly die, and it will be too late. And the only thing that will matter at that point in time is, how was I living 2 seconds before that? You know, in Luke chapter 16, we've got the account of the rich man. He dies and he lifts up his eyes in torment. We've got Lazarus. He dies, he lifts up his eyes to see angels. And that's the only two alternatives. Each of us is going to lift up our eyes, and we're going to meet one of those two realities. And for some of us, it might be quite unexpected. Everything was going great. You couldn't have asked for a better day. And just like that, I was nearly cut off. Number 3, an observation. I want to say something about the Lord's suffering. Something occurred to me as I was lying in the hospital bed after I had gotten back from some of the worst pain that I can recall in my life. I thought to myself, I will do anything to make it stop. I don't care what it is. I will do it if I can make it stop. Later, as I'm laying there contemplating the situation, it occurred to me that the Lord endured pain, no doubt that was worse than that what I endured when he had his crucifixion. It was far worse than my pain. Listen, and he could have made it stop, but he chose not to. You know, John chapter 10 and verse 17, Jesus said, "Therefore doth my Father love me, because I lay down my life. No man taketh it from me, but I lay it down." Friends, he could have made it stop, but he endured it for us. I will tell you what, it has forever put a whole new light in my mind on the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Number 4, I want to make an observation about God's will. Since this accident, I have repeatedly had people tell me something like this. They have said, well, Don, it's happened for a reason, or it's God's will, or words to that effect, or this is all part of God's plan. Brethren, I want to tell you this morning, I do not believe that. You know, if we are not careful, we get dangerously close to Calvinism when we start suggesting that God causes everything to happen. I don't believe God wrecked me on that four-wheeler. You know, the fact of the matter is, God has given us free will. God allows us to suffer the consequences of our actions. You know, sometimes there'll be a drunk driver, and a drunk driver might have an accident and he might kill a little baby. And then maybe at the funeral, there's someone there, and he's trying to comfort the parents of that little baby, and that well-meaning person will say something like this, well, God must have wanted your child in heaven. Are you kidding me? No wonder people get angry with God when they think that God is killing their little baby. Brethren, we need to be careful, and we need to understand that not everything that happens is the will of God. Now, I'm not saying God won't work in our lives, and I'm not saying he can't use this, because I think he certainly can. I'm saying God didn't wreck me on that four-wheeler, and we need to quit saying that he did. Next, I want to talk about some benefits of suffering. Specifically, I want to talk about my suffering. Now, you know, skeptics and atheists, they will use suffering as proof that God does not exist. In fact, they would say if suffering exists, either God is not powerful enough to stop it, or he doesn't care enough to stop it, or there is no God. And so they will say your concept of God is not accurate. Brethren, I want to tell you quite the opposite. I want to tell you some benefits that have come from my suffering. Number 1, you see it on the chart here. Suffering teaches us how to pray. Friends, I have never prayed so hard in my life as I did after this accident. I literally begged the Lord to let me walk again. I can remember praying some intense prayers in my life, but I don't ever remember begging the Lord. I had thousands of faithful Christians around the world praying for me. I asked them to pray the same prayer. Now, a skeptic might have argued, well, you're not walking, are you? Where's your God at times like this? I believe God did answer my prayer, but I believe that the answer has been no. At least for now, the answer is no. Now, I don't know why that is. But you know, we have to keep in mind that God sees the entirety of our timeline. God sees my whole life. God sees eternity. I see just a little teeny piece. I can't make the decisions, and I can't know what is best. I don't know all of these things, but I know that God sees it all. I see a piece of the puzzle. God sees the completed puzzle. But I do know this. I know that I have been blessed immensely through this process. And if you run across somebody who doesn't believe in the power of prayer, you send him to me, because I want to talk to that person. Next, benefits of suffering. Friends, suffering takes away the love of this world. It makes me not love this world. Since this accident, I have said multiple times, this world is not my home. I'm just a passing through. You know, John 14 and verse 2, Jesus said, in my Father's house there are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you, I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there may ye be also. Brother Don McWhorter wrote this. He said, woe to the man or woman whose life on this earth is so pleasant that he forgets about heaven. And that's right. Suffering makes me not fall in love with this world. Number 3, suffering allows Christians to let their light shine. Now, you know Matthew chapter 5 and verse 16, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. When I was in the hospital, we received so many cards. In fact, my dad was there at the hospital. He was counting these cards. We counted over 2,800 cards. The number that we still received them since I've gotten out of the hospital, the number is now somewhere around 3,500 cards. Many of these cards that we had contained gift cards in them. In fact, a lot of them had Chick-fil-A gift cards in them. In fact, I joke that we will be eating Chick-fil-A till the Lord comes again. We had so many Chick-fil-A gift cards. But we started hanging these cards on the wall in the hospital. In fact, I found this picture, and I noticed that it had a shot of some of the cards, just a corner of the room. But we started hanging these cards on the wall in the hospital room. We had nearly every space covered all over the hospital room. Everybody who walked in was in awe. There was a man who had worked in the hospital mailroom for years. He said he'd never seen anything like it. Somebody walked in and they said, are you somebody famous? And I said, I'm a Christian. I said, that's what brethren do. And it made an impression on everybody that Christians were letting their light shine. I happened to be in the hospital the same time as Kenny Rogers. Here's a shot of me sitting and talking to Kenny Rogers. And somebody made the observation, Kenny Rogers didn't even get as many cards as you do. And I said, well, Kenny Rogers is not a Christian. I worked on that. I tried to do something about that. The church at South Haven, where I'm a member, started a GoFundMe account. One man who was not a member of the church said he saw this GoFundMe account. He said he saw how much money was being given, and he thought to himself, I got to find out about that church. And he started attending with us. I was privileged when I got home to study with and baptize that man. It started with him being impressed at the love of brethren. The next thing I want you to notice is that suffering helps us to have a proper perspective on physical possessions. Brethren, in the months and weeks after this accident, I started thinking about all the things I was going to have to give up. Many things just because I couldn't physically use them anymore from the wheelchair. When we got home, I had to sell my pickup truck. Last year, I had gone out, I bought my dream pickup truck. I had bought a 2018 Toyota Tacoma limited edition. I got leather, 4-wheel drive. It was bright blue. It was exactly what I wanted. And I had to get rid of it. I couldn't drive it anymore. And it pained me because I love that truck. But you know, this whole experience made me stop and realize maybe I shouldn't love things so much. In fact, maybe it made me stop and realize maybe that's part of the problem. In fact, it occurred to me, wasn't that part of the problem? Wasn't that the problem with the rich young ruler? In Matthew chapter 19, he loved his things too much. In fact, maybe this incident ended up helping me. You know, the rich young ruler walked away from Jesus because he loved his stuff. And then Jesus turned to his disciples and said, "Assuredly I say unto you, it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Again I say unto you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God." Matthew 19:23. And I'm rich. And you're rich. We might not admit it, but we are very rich, and I believe many otherwise faithful Christians may lose their souls because of this issue. Next, suffering brings out the best in people. I had 2 firemen from Hernando, Mississippi, just up the road from us. They were not members of the church. When they found out that I was in the hospital and that I had had this accident, they cut my grass all summer long for free. They will not let me pay them. They are still doing my yard for free. When I finally got home, the first Sunday that we were back, we went out to eat at Longhorn Steakhouse. We go there almost a lot of Sundays. And the waiter there, when he saw me in the wheelchair, he said, "What happened?" And he began to cry, and he hugged my neck. When I got ready to leave, our waitress said, "Your meal's been paid for." And I said, "By who?" She said, "The waiter paid for your meal." These are people who are non-Christians. Since the accident, my parents were there every single day for 3 months. And I watched my daddy, who's 75 years old, I watched him pick up my lame body and move me around. I watched my wife do many unpleasant things that I wish had never happened. The church at South Haven has been incredible to me. Many specific acts of kindness have been done that I can't even mention. Many people drove hundreds of miles to see me in the hospital just to spend a few minutes. You know, John 13 and verse 35, Jesus said, "By this all men will know that you're my disciples, if you have love for one another." Next, suffering humbles people. This entire incident has greatly humbled me. Before this accident, I was very physically strong. I was working out 45 minutes a day on the elliptical. My legs were muscular. I was physically strong. I was financially well off. I had control of my life. At work, I was the boss. You know, when everything is going your way, it's easy to get full of yourself. You get to feeling very self-sufficient. But an accident like this will make you realize how much you depend on God. A whole team of highly skilled doctors could not do anything about my situation, and it makes you realize how much you depend on God. This accident has humbled me in a way that I have never been humbled, and I think that's probably good. 1 Peter 5 and verse 8 says, "Therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time." Number 7, suffering makes you sympathetic to other people. You know, you may think that you sympathize with somebody else, but until you have been there personally, there is really no way to know. But when you hurt that way, and you know what it's like, it makes you want to be there for others. Romans chapter 12 and verse 15 says, "Weep with those who weep." When I see people who are handicapped now, people who are in chairs, people who are in pain, people who tell me that their back hurts, I don't view it the same way. I want to help them. And that's a blessing that comes from suffering. Number 8, suffering purifies us. Now, what do I mean by that? Friends, when I realized how close I came to dying, it made me search my life for any shortcomings. When I realized that at any moment, just like that, I can be thrust into eternity, I don't want there to be anything in my life, because you don't have a second to stop and fix it. We are riding along, and bam, just like that, that could have been it. If there is anything amiss, it is too late. You know, 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 5 says, "Examine yourselves whether you be in the faith, test yourselves." He doesn't mean examine yourself to see if you're a Christian. This is written to Christians. He says to Christians, examine yourselves whether you be in the faith. That is, whether you're walking in the light, whether you are faithful. Why? Because you don't want to be caught unprepared for eternity. You know, David said in Psalm 119 and verse 67, David said that before he was afflicted, he went astray. What does that mean? Something about this affliction made him get his life together. Psalm 119 and verse 71, David said, it is good for me that I have been afflicted, that I may learn your statutes. That is, suffering has made me stop and study and examine my life. Those things are good. Where do I go from here? Where do we go from here? Brethren, how can I be happy in the face of this difficulty? I want to suggest to you that every one of us makes a choice to be happy or to be miserable. You know, when I was in the hospital, it was an amazing thing because there were people there who were, I'm a paraplegic, there were people there who were quadriplegics. That is, some of them were riding around blowing on a straw just so that they could control their wheelchair, and some of them were happy. How is that? It's because it has to do with your mindset, and we each make a choice whether you're in this condition or whether you are able-bodied. There are many able-bodied people who are miserable because they've chosen to be miserable. How can I be happy in the face of great difficulty? I want to suggest a few things to you. Number one, the Apostle Paul said in Philippians chapter 4 verse 11, I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. Now that tells me several things. Number one, it doesn't take place naturally. Paul said, I've had to learn it. I've had to work at it. Number two, don't forget that you're a Christian. I can remember one day I was in the hospital. I was feeling overwhelmed with sorrow. I was thinking of all the things that I had lost physically, the things that I can't do anymore. I was thinking of physical possessions. I was thinking of physical abilities. And then something happened. I have an iPhone, and iPhones do this strange thing where they will take the pictures that you have in your picture file and they will put them together in a little video and they will send them to you. On this particular day, it had been Father's Day. My daughter and her husband had come to visit us, and when they left, there was already kind of an empty feeling because they had been there and they had gone. And right after they left, this video popped up, and I thought, well, I'm going to watch it. It was a video from the last trip that my family had made together to Disney World. And the picture, it ended with the picture of me standing there with my children. And I was standing there strong. I had my arms wrapped around them all. And I thought to myself, I will never be able to do that again. And it brought me low. And I thought to myself, how can I go on like this? And then I thought, I'm a Christian. This is all temporary. This is going to be short. And then I'm going to go to heaven. And then I thought, I've got it made. And then I got to thinking about all the other people who were in the hospital with me, who were paralyzed. And I pitied them because I thought, if all I have in this life is paralysis, and then I'm going to die, then that's miserable. But that brings me to the next point. We need to realize, now I want you to prepare yourself for this, we need to realize that God did not put us on this earth to be happy. Now you might think that's a strange statement, but I want you to listen to this. This is a quote from Jane McWhorter's book, Let This Cup Pass. She says this. She says, we're to prepare ourselves for life after death. It doesn't matter whether we live 50 years or 100 years. Neither does it matter whether they are carefree years or years filled with sorrow. The only consideration of lasting importance is where we will spend in eternity. You know, Ecclesiastes 12 and verse 13, Solomon says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole of man. The King James says the whole duty. Duty's not in there. It's the whole of man. That's what we're all about, is to fear God and keep His commandments. It matters what comes after this life. That's what he's saying. Here's point number 3. With the 2 previous points in mind, we need to be evangelistic. I wanted all the people in the hospital with me to have the same hope that I have. And I thought to myself, who knows, maybe this disability will open a door for me to teach some people that I might not have had an opportunity to teach otherwise. And it's very interesting because when I got out of the hospital, I went home. We had a crew of contractors who were adapting our house, adapting our bathroom, widening the doors, making me a roll-in shower. And in the process of talking with them, we studied with and baptized 4 of those contractors. And this is the picture of these 4 men after they were baptized. Brethren, I tell myself this regularly. If I can convert one person because of my situation, if one person will be in eternity, I will look back and think, so what? I spent 30 years in a wheelchair. Who cares if these souls are in heaven? It's hard to face that now, I'll tell you that. But from eternity's side, looking back, a few years in a wheelchair is going to be nothing. After the accident, I thought to myself, if I could trade every earthly possession that I have, if somebody came to me right now and said, you give up every earthly possession, you give up your house, give up your money, give up your cars, everything, and we'll restore you back to normal and you can walk again, I would do it in just a split second and not even have to stop to think. But you know, there's one thing that I would not trade, and that is my soul. Because Matthew 16 verse 26 says, for what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and yet lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Friends, as we conclude the lesson today, I want to tell you this. There is nothing more important than your soul. But the fact of the matter is, people are trading their souls all the time for physical possessions that will last less than the span of a vapor. And then their life is going to be cut short. And they will go into eternity and leave it all behind. You know, I think sometimes people think that to say that our lives could be cut short, that something could happen to you, oh, that's just a preacher story. I tell you what, I see that in a way I never saw it before, because any one of us could pull out of this parking lot this morning and a truck hits you and you lift up your eyes in eternity thinking, I just heard a sermon on that. And it will be too late. And the only thing that will matter is, how were you living 2 seconds prior to that? Right now, we have an opportunity to make our lives right, to be sure that we're right with the Lord. If you're here and you're not a New Testament Christian, you need to know, in order to become one and be prepared, you need to hear the gospel, believe it, repent of your sins, confess your faith in Christ, and be baptized in water for the remission of your sins. If you're ready to do that today, we are ready to assist you. Maybe you're here and you say, I've never heard that before in my life. I want to study. Let's do it. Maybe you're here as a Christian, and upon examining yourself, you say, I haven't been walking in the faith, and I need to make my life right. We would count it an honor to go to God and pray on your behalf this morning. Today, you've got an opportunity to get your life right with the Lord. If you need to do that, we hope that you'll come as together we stand and sing the invitation song.